Well, here we are with our Sunday school lesson for November the 20th. And I'll say that on November the 20th, certainly in the South, winter has arrived. We've had several mornings where it's been below freezing in the morning, but in the afternoon the sun comes out and it gets up to the 50s, and it's just beautiful. And of course, this week is also Thanksgiving week, and it's a week where there's going to be a lot of people travel. I've always heard that the Wednesday before Thanksgiving is the busiest travel day of the year. And people will be getting together with family and friends, and that's just such a wonderful blessing to be able to do that. I also wanted to share, and it's something that I think every year at Thanksgiving. It's kind of funny how there's different things that from your past that you think of, and special memories. And for me, one of my special memories is my mother's father. We called him Pop, and Pop was a farmer. And Pop had a silo, and he would put his silage in there and have it ready to feed the cows during the winter. And he would always say that if he could wait until Thanksgiving to open up the silo, if the weather was such they didn't have snow on the ground, that the cows could still get out and graze, but if he could wait until Thanksgiving to open up the silo, he knew that he had enough feed to feed the cows through the winter. And I think about that every Thanksgiving, because that was so important to him. And it's a wonderful memory as I reflect back on his life and my growing up years and how special all that was. Our lesson for November the 20th is titled Lessons from Other Faith Traditions. The purpose statement is to consider wisdom from those of other backgrounds. And it comes from the book of Exodus, which, as we've said before, is a wonderful historical book, and one that we can take a lot of lessons from as we reflect back on the lives of God's chosen people, and of which we're descendants of. And one of the things that struck me when I looked at this lesson, and it's about Moses, and I say this all the time, I look at other references, but Charles Swindoll wrote a series of books, and I think I've mentioned it before, and they're character studies. And one of his books was written about Moses. It's a wonderful book if you would like to know, and it reads like a story. And he asks great questions at the end of every chapter. So if you ever want to really look at a character and you really want to know more about Moses, I'd encourage you to pick up Swindoll's book about Moses. And I used that as a reference when I was preparing this lesson. One of the things that struck me as I was looking at this lesson is the whole idea of receiving and following advice. And if you're like me, and I look back again, I reflect over my life, that it's sometimes a struggle. I mean, sometimes when somebody tells you something, when somebody gives you a piece of advice, you don't necessarily like it. Or you kind of just shrug it off and you go, okay, well, you've got your opinion, I've got mine, this way I'm going to do things, and that's okay. But and sometimes our pride kicks in. And we don't want it to look like we don't know what we're doing. So we ignore the advice. Well, I mean, you're challenging me, and I really don't know what I'm doing, but I don't want you to know I don't know what I'm doing, so I'm just going to ignore you. So the part of this story of Moses that we're going to consider today, we will see that Moses was stressed out, and he was overloaded. He was burdened by all of the responsibilities that he had. And we're going to take a close look at how Moses gets advice and how he reacts to that advice. And how he ends up ultimately listening to the advice and how it changes his life. So I'm going to read the story. It's a long story, but I think it's important as we have an understanding of what the lesson is about. So I am going to read it. It comes from Exodus 18, and it's all of that chapter. Jethro, Midian's priest and Moses' father-in-law, heard about everything that God had done for Moses and for God's people Israel, how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. And Moses' father-in-law Jethro took with him Zipporah, Moses' wife, whom he had sent away, along with her 2 sons. One was named Gershom, because he said, I have been an immigrant living in a foreign land. The other was named Eliezer, because he said, the God of my ancestors was my helper, who rescued me from Pharaoh's sword. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought Moses' sons and wife back to him in the desert, where he had set up camp at God's mountain. He sent word to Moses, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you along with your wife and your 2 sons. Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, and he bowed down and kissed him. They asked each other how they were doing, and then they went into the tent. Moses then told the father-in-law everything that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians on Israel's behalf, all the difficulty they had on their journey and how the Lord had rescued them. Jethro was glad about all the good things that the Lord had done for Israel in saving them from the Egyptians' power. Jethro said, "Bless the Lord who rescued you from the Egyptians' power and from Pharaoh's power, who rescued the people from Egypt's oppressive power. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods, because what happened when the Egyptians plotted against them." Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought an entirely burnt offering and sacrifices to God. Aaron came with all of Israel's elders to eat a meal with Moses' father-in-law in God's presence. The next day Moses sat as a judge, while the people stood around Moses from morning until evening. When Moses' father-in-law saw what he was doing for the people, he said, "What's this that you are doing for the people? Why do you sit alone while all the people are standing around you from morning until evening?" Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me to inquire of God. When a conflict arises between them, they come to me, and I judge between the two of them. I also teach them God's regulations and instructions." Moses' father-in-law said to him, What you are doing isn't good. You will end up totally wearing yourself out, both you and these people who are with you. The work is too difficult for you. You can't do it alone. Now listen to me and let me give you some advice. And may God be with you. Your role should be to represent the people before God. You should bring their disputes before God yourself. Explain the regulations and instructions to them. Let them know the way they are supposed to go and the things they are supposed to do. But you should also look among all the people for capable persons who respect God. They should be trustworthy and not corrupt. Set these persons over the people as officers of groups of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Let them sit as judges for the people at all times. They should bring every major dispute to you, but they should decide all the minor cases themselves. This will be much easier for you, and they will share your load. If you do this and God directs you, then you will be able to endure, and all these people will be able to go back to their homes much happier. Moses listened to his father-in-law's suggestions and did everything that he had said. Moses chose capable persons from all Israel and set them as leaders over the people, as officers over groups of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. They acted as judges for the people at all times. They would refer the hard cases to Moses, but all the minor cases they decided themselves. Then Moses said goodbye to his father-in-law, and Jethro went back to his own country. Now let's reflect just for a few minutes on this story that we just read. It's a great story. It's a story that, and we're going to talk about that, how this really resonates with us. First thing that struck me about this story was that here comes Jethro with his daughter and Moses' two sons. So he brings Moses' wife and two sons to him, and they must have had a very close relationship. I mean, think about that. I don't know what kind of a relationship you had, a father-in-law, mother-in-law, but if your father-in-law came to you, there probably was a little bit of question about, okay, why are you here? What do you want to share with me? And that was not the case. That's not what we see here. Obviously, Jethro and Moses had become very close friends. There was this strong sense of respect that we pick up on. They greeted each other. They went into the tent. And they bowed down to each other. Moses told his father-in-law about everything that the Lord had done. He told him, they didn't have social media. They didn't have news. They didn't have newspapers. And so he told him about everything that had been happening over the years. And notice how Jethro responded to his son-in-law. He showed not an ounce of jealousy over what had happened, over Moses' power, over the position he enjoyed. But he rejoiced over what had happened. He was delighted to hear of all the good things the Lord had done for Israel in rescuing them from the hands of the Egyptians. I mean, he said, "Praise be to the Lord who rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians and of Pharaoh. And who rescued the people from the hand of the Egyptians? Now I know that the Lord is greater than all other gods, for he did this to those who had treated Israel arrogantly. And then, in good priestly fashion that Jethro was, he offered sacrifices. Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law in the presence of God. I mean, what a beautiful celebration this was. This was a Thanksgiving celebration. They didn't have Thanksgiving then. That's our holiday. But it was a celebration like Thanksgiving, where we have in-laws, we have family members, we have friends. They all come together to eat and to rejoice in God's mighty works and to give thanks. And after the joy of this happy reunion, Jethro began to observe what Moses was doing in his ministry and a little bit about his leadership. And he saw that Moses took his seat to judge issues that the people brought to him. And it says that they stood around from morning until evening. Now, can you imagine? Have you ever stood in line at a grocery store? Have you ever stood in line at the DMV? You don't like it. You don't like it. And yet these people had to stand around from morning into evening to get to be heard, to have their situation listened to by Moses. And Jethro looks at Moses and he says, what you're doing is not right. It's not right. He said, what you're doing is you're first of all, you're wearing yourself out because you're trying to hear all these cases. And you're also wearing out the people who are trusting in you because they're going to get tired of waiting. And so here comes somebody who's not been involved at all. And have you ever had that happen? They've come into your church. They've come into your business. And they come in and haven't been involved in anything you've been doing, but they come in with a different perspective. And sometimes that's so refreshing. Somebody comes in and sees what you're doing and says, you know what? I've got a suggestion. There's a better way to do it. Some person fresh off the streets comes into the church building and looks around and says, have you ever thought about doing this? They watch what we do in a committee and they say, well, gee, have you ever thought about doing it this way? Why didn't, and sometimes we look at ourselves and say, well, we never really thought about that. You know, there's an expression that I love, and I've used it often. The expression is, if you always do what you've always done, you will always get what you already got. There's a story that that Zig Ziglar told. And it's a great story. It's a great story about a husband and wife, and the husband was watching the wife. She's getting ready to cook a ham. And she gets the ham out and she cuts the end off the ham with a knife, and she puts the ham in a pan and she puts it in the oven to bake. And the husband asked his wife, he said, why do you cut the end off the ham? I know that you always do that, but why do you do that? And she said, I don't know. I mean, my mama always cut the end off the ham, so that's why I do it. I learned from her and I cut the end off the ham before I put it in the pan before I bake it. And he said, well, let's call your mother up and ask her why she does that. So they got her on the phone and said, Mama, why do you cut the end off the ham when you put it in the pan before you bake it? And Mother said, well, gee, I don't know. I did that because Grandma told me how to do that. I mean, I always watched her and she told me how to cook, and she always cut the end off the ham before she put it in the pan and got ready to bake it. And they said, well, we're going to go see Grandma this weekend. Why don't we ask her when we go see her? So that weekend they went to visit her grandmother. And they said, Grandma, why do you always cut the end of the ham off before you put it in a pan to bake it? And she said, oh, that's easy. She said, my pan is too short for the ham to fit in, so I have to cut some of the ham off so it'll fit in the pan. Isn't that the way so many things in our life are? We've done them repeatedly, we've done them the same way, but when we step back, when somebody says, why are you doing that? You start looking into it and you go, you know what, that's a good point. Maybe there is another way to do it. And that's what Jethro did here with Moses. He said, this thing you're doing, he said, why are you doing it all alone? He's asking him a question about priorities. He's saying, why are you doing this alone? Why have you put your priorities such that you have to do all of this by yourself? And that also leads to the question of personnel. Why don't you get somebody else to help you take some of the load off? Why do we do things alone? How many times do we get into something and it becomes overwhelming to us? But then we also feel like, well, if I ask help, if I need help, there's something wrong with the way I'm doing it. He simply told him, he said, this is a big job. It's as simple as that. And yes, God has called you to perform this task, but you need to look at getting some help. Jethro's response was a very caring, it was a very direct response. He didn't say it with any malice at all, but he said, you really need to get some help. And so it's obvious that Jethro is not trying to be a know-it-all, but he really has an interest in Moses' well-being. And Jethro then gave Moses two very valuable pieces of advice. He said, you need to make teaching a priority. He said, you need to be the people's representative before God, and you need to bring their disputes to Him. You need to teach them the decrees, the laws, and show them the way to live and the duties they are to perform. But then he went on to say and suggest that he should delegate some of that workload. He said, select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens, and have them serve as judges. Have them serve as judges to look at the minor things and bring to you the major things that need to be dealt with. So he suggested that get some help. You'll be much more effective when you get help. And he suggested that he get good people to support him. And that encouraged Moses. It encouraged him that he could be more effective. And it encouraged him to get other people to share in the leadership and to help people be ministered to in a far more efficient way. I think that we need to reflect on four parts of this story that are so important to us. First of all, we need to learn, if we're wise, that we have limitations. And we all have limitations. Sometimes we don't want to admit them to other people, but we know we have limitations. And we need to acknowledge that, and we need to come to grips with that. Our bodies need rest. If we burn the candle at both ends, then we shorten the life of the candle. We can't do that. We also learn that if we're being wise, we need to determine priorities and what's important in our lives. We do have limitations, so what are the essential things that we need to do? What are the incidental things that can wait till later? And then what's the other group of additional things that aren't as important, and if we have time we can get to and focus on at a later time? And we also need to learn, if we're being wise, that we need other people to help share the load. I mean, we've heard many times that expressions like, if one person falls down, you need a friend to help you back up. We've heard that a cord of 3 strands is much stronger than a cord of 2. That actually comes from Ecclesiastes. We need each other, my friends. We need each other anytime we take on a task. I've many times have used the example, and I used to use it in business, in companies that I had, and I would say 2 plus 2 always equals 5. And people would look at me and say, what do you mean? And I said, 2 people plus 2 people together can do way more than they can individually. There's in science, that's called synergy. One quick illustration that I want to give you, and I don't know if you've ever been to a horse pulling contest, but it's an interesting thing. They have a sled, and the sled has weight on it, and they keep putting weight on it until the horse can't pull anymore, and they have, they identify how strong that horse was, how much weight it could pull. And so I wanted to share this example with you, that there was a horse pulling contest. The winning horse in one contest pulled 9,000 pounds all by himself. The runner-up pulled 8,000 pounds by himself. So the winner had pulled 9,000, the runner-up pulled 8,000 pounds. Together you would expect they could pull 17,000 pounds. That's not so. They hooked the 2 horses up to the sled, and they pulled over 30,000 pounds together, nearly twice as much as separately. Learning to work together and to delegate is critical to success. It's critical to being effective. I say that we just had our barbecue. The barbecue would not be possible with one person trying to do it all. It just wouldn't happen. It takes a lot of people. And it's important that those people share with other people so they learn. So that they learn how to do each individual task. And they can share it with other people so that you continue with that very important ministry. I think probably the most important thing we have to remember is we have to keep our ego in check when we're approached with an idea, and we don't let pride get in the way of common sense. It's a powerful lesson, my friends. It's a powerful lesson, and it's one that Moses teaches us in the way he responded, the way Jethro shared an idea. And I think it's important that as we journey through our life, through our faith journey, there's going to be times when people are going to suggest things to us. And I think it's important to bring them in to the conversation, to bring them into the group, and to consider the ideas that they have. Will you pray with me, my friends? Our gracious Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for today. We give you thanks for this lesson. It's so powerful as we look back on different situations and we begin to realize how much more effective we were when we included other people, when we expanded the group, when we shared the responsibility. We just ask again that as we go throughout this week, you continue to keep our eyes open to the things you want us to see, our ears open to the things you want us to hear, and our hearts overflowing with that love that you have put in each and every one of us. In His name we pray. Amen. I love you, my friends. I hope you have a blessed Thanksgiving. I hope you have a safe Thanksgiving. And I look forward to seeing you again soon.